me in welcoming Dr. Darrell Bricker.
Thank you very much. So what I want to do, before we get started talking about the next federal election, which is coming down the rails and will be hitting us in September, when it's supposed to be called, and the actual election date will be on October the 19th, there's a few things that you need to know about the country. Because everything that we used to think about the country isn't really as true as it used to be. The country's been going through a massive transformation in our population. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that before we get into the political implications, because quite honestly, it has an impact on everything that you're doing in business, and particularly here as the Chamber of Commerce in Kitchener-Waterloo. This region is changing in ways that I can't even identify. And I can't even, when I come here, it's a completely different place than where I grew up. So sometimes when you're here and you're watching these things, they seem glacial, but over the period of 20 years or 30 years, they're actually huge changes. And that's what's happening to the Canadian population. And not only changes everything about the towns that you live in, but because it changes the towns that you live in, it changes the politics. So that's what I want to talk about, because I have a different take on it than generally I think that you will hear, and I would argue that mine's more accurate. So there you go. First of all, I want to talk about the old country, who we used to be. We used to be English and French and very white. We used to be more rural with a focus on natural resources. The last decade in Canadian history, in which 50% of us lived in a rural area and 50% of us lived in an urban area, was the 1920s. So now 81% of the population lives in an urban area. If you live in a rural area in this country, you're in big trouble. We had the politics of what I call elite accommodation, basically driven by white men in Ottawa, Montreal, and Toronto. Yes, there's other parts of the country, but they're really not interesting. They really don't determine who wins. We don't really care. We were trusting of public authorities in institutions. Preamble to our Constitution, as every political science professor can tell you, is peace, order, and good government, not life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We were fearful, paternalistic, conservative, judgmental, and reflexively anti-American. I remember the last big election campaign I worked on was the 1988 federal election campaign. Yes, I'm that old. And in that election, you had the raging grannies in the NDP and the Liberal Party running against a free trade agreement with the United States. But there were also monarchists who were opposed to it. And in fact, the story of Canadian history since before Confederation is really the relationship that we have with the UK. And we came together as a country principally because of what was going on with the American Civil War and what was happening in the United States. So we've always been reflexively anti-American, both the left and the right. But the country that we live in today is very different. This is the country of 2005. We're more urban and we're more multicultural. We're world traders with a growing focus on services. Yes, natural resources are still extremely important in our economy, but not like they were 50 years ago. We're older and we're more female. The average Canadian woman outlives the average Canadian man by 3 years. The average Canadian lives to about the age of, my friends here from Family Life and Sun Life, they know all about this. All your actuarial tables will tell you, lives till about the age of 80. I think these days it's 81. So women tend to live to 84 and men slightly lower than that. But the largest single group of households in Canada, new households in Canada, are people living alone. So when you start thinking about the household composition of Canadians, we're not living in the family circumstances that we used to. Actually, the fastest growing group are people who are living on their own, and disproportionately women, because they don't get remarried if they get divorced generally, and if their husband dies, they don't get remarried, and they're now getting married later and starting their lives on their own. That's why our birth rate is in such a decline. We're tolerant, opinionated, demanding, and difficult. How can you be all four? If anybody works in customer service, and I know some of you do, people have never been tougher to deal with. When you have more access to information than you've ever had, leave the internet aside. Look at how many news channels there are on television. I remember when I first started doing TV news, there was one. and it had just started. It was CBC News World. I'd be on there 3 times a week because nobody would ever go on. Nobody watched it. Now there's just tons of news channels and information channels. Most of the content you're seeing on many of the new satellite channels or new spectrum channels are all, how to do whatever. They're information based. They're not the same type of entertainment that we used to look at. Well, you combine that with the fact that we have the most educated population that we've ever had on this side of in Canada. Why would we expect that they were going to be anything but more challenging? And you're going to just see more of it. But at the same time, we're intolerant, opinionated, we're tolerant. How can we be that? Well, if you're a homophobe, if you're somebody who has a problem with women in the workplace, if you're sexist, if you're somebody with hate in your heart towards a particular group of people in our society, you're going to be very, very wrongly educated. This is one of our biggest successes. And it's why we can go through so much change without so much civil strife in this country, because we really embrace tolerance. If there's a Canadian value that's really risen to the top in the modern era, it's tolerance. We're becoming more ideologically divided. There's more of a left and there's more of a right in this country. Walking between the raindrops in the center, tough place to be these days, especially if you're on the golf course.
Exactly.
And there's light. We're less engaged with traditional institutions. On my street, I live in High Park in Toronto. One church just got converted to condos, and there's another one for sale. Both of them Anglican. We're not engaging with traditional institutions like we used to. Many political scientists can tell you that we're now at historical lows in terms of voter participation in elections. And we're aggressively Canadian. What do I mean by that? The best example I can think of this is what happened when Corporal Cirillo was shot at the War Memorial in Ottawa and was brought back to Toronto down the new highway of heroes and the route of heroes through the city of Toronto. All of that spontaneous outpouring about somebody who's providing military service, I don't know if you would have seen that in 1975. And if we were waiting for the government to get it organized, we'd still be waiting. This was Canadians aggressively expressing their patriotism and their support for the military and somebody who was serving it. But we didn't just see it for him, we saw it all through the Afghan war. And there's other examples. Look at those boisterous crowds and things like the Olympics these days. We're Canadians. It's a very, very different atmosphere than the one that I grew up in, where you were sort of deferential and apologizing. What's the favorite Canadian word? Sorry. Share of the population by region. I wrote a book about this. It's called The Big Shift, and this is the big shift in the slide. Ontario in the west, their population is surging. This is 1961 in this pinky kind of color, and the red color is 2011. The proportion of the population that lives in each region of the country. There's been a big shift, hence the title of the book, from the east to the west. Quebec is in decline, and Atlantic Canada is in tragic decline. In terms of the number of people living there, where's all the growth? The 905 suburbs of Toronto, actually even out as far as we are here, and Western Canada, principally in the cities. And what you should know about our population in terms of population growth is all of our growth in our population is being driven by immigration. In fact, if we had, just based on our birth rate, which is about 1.6, that means every woman on average during their lifetime has 1.6 kids. We're a half kid short. Yes?
I had read somewhere that it's over 50% now. Immigrants represent more than 51%.
Toronto. I'm going to show you that in a second. We've had to really rely on immigration. And what's happened with immigration is it's gone from about 100,000 on average a year, now up to, for the last 20 years, between 250 and 300,000. It's about 0.7% of our entire population. It's 2 new Torontos in the last 20 years, all settling around the outskirts of Toronto and in Western Canada. It's had a massive impact on our population. But it's not just the size of the growth, it's also where people are coming from. This is immigration, sources of immigration in 1970. Number one, the UK. Number two, the US. Most of them Western Europe. This is what immigration used to look like. In fact, if I went up to 1980, you'd still see the UK was in the first place. This is what it looks like now. The top three countries are all Pacific countries. The Philippines, which wasn't even on the chart in 1970, India and China. Pacific nations, the Canadian population is moving west. We're moving from being an Atlantic nation to becoming a Pacific nation. As is our politics. But look at the UK, how much it's dropped down. The US, well, we don't have any more draft dodgers. That's true, that's who that was. And when you take a look at the Chinese here, 99.5% mainland China back in 1970, all Hong Kong. 99.9% the other way. Canada's moving from being an eastern country to a western country, Atlantic to Pacific, white to brown. Although you wouldn't know it looking around this room.
What about brain drain to the U.S.?
Net population growth in Canada. Maybe we are losing some people to the United States, but the net population growth, when you look at the types of immigrants that we're getting in, we're actually getting back more than we're losing. Because the people who are coming here today aren't your poor huddled masses. They're people with degrees, education. They're middle-class economic strivers who are moving here for economic opportunity. If you look at the proportion of immigrants that we have that are coming under economic programming as opposed to refugees and family reunification, it's hugely in the area of economic immigrants. This is what this gentleman was mentioning. Percentage of foreign-born people per city. Toronto is the largest group of foreign-born population, percentage foreign-born population of any major city in the world. And the reason I put this up is just to show that. Everybody thinks New York City is the big one. New York City is half of what Toronto is. By the year 2031 in Toronto, 63% of the population will be visible minorities.
It's true.
So when you start thinking about selling insurance, selling energy, selling whatever you're selling, get ready for small households of people who are coming from different parts of the world, and the market is going to be driven by what's happening in the cities. So what do you know about feng shui if you're selling real estate? You better learn. So anyway, and the one I wanted to point out here too was Montreal, where it's 20%. And this is part of Quebec's problem. They can't attract enough immigrants, and they can't attract the right kind of immigrants. If you look at who's moving there, it tends to be more refugees, people who are just trying to start off their life or whatever. Because they're coming from actually sub-Saharan Africa and from Haiti. Sir.
Because of their language laws?
Yeah. I mean, everything that's happened in Quebec is as a result of the political circumstances rather than economic. Everything that's happening economic is driven by what's happening politically. Politics matters. So the emerging Canadian political landscape. We have two things, and this is based on the 2011 election. We have what I call a consolidating right. This is the new Stephen Harper coalition. Every election that we've had in the past has always been about winning enough seats in Ontario and Quebec to carry the nation. That's how you win. How many seats did Stephen Harper win in Quebec in the last election? Somebody have a little liver snap or something here for him? A doggy treat? Right? 5. 5. That was it. And he needs to win less than that next time. So what he's done is he's put together a new coalition, which is west of Quebec and very suburban. So it has an ocean orientation. It's the Pacific Ocean. It's the Toronto suburbs, rural and western Canada. Values, they focus on the economy. Government's part of the problem, not part of the solution. Law and order, the old Canadian symbols like the Canadian military, the monarchy. Biggest supporters of the monarchy in Canada, New Canadians. Don't ask me why. Well, I've got some hypotheses, but that's for another day. And they have suburban sensibilities. 2-car garage, lawns, backyards. They're not biking to their locavore market in Kensington Market in Toronto. Those guys aren't voting Conservative. They never will. But if they live in Aurora, they are. Or if they live in Brampton, they are. And their concerns aren't like the downtown political elite's concerns. It's a different set of sensibilities. The demographics, middle class, established immigrants, college educated and entrepreneurs. One of the biggest indicators of whether somebody votes for the Liberal, for the left or the right, is whether or not they went to university. If you went to university, you're probably voting left. And they're entrepreneurs. Their mood, positive, pro-change, they like where the country's headed. And they constitute about 45% of the potential electorate, and they're united behind one choice. At least they were in 2011. The other side is the emerging left. It's focused in our cities, Quebec, and in eastern Canada. Quebec, Atlantic urban centers, their ocean is the Atlantic. Their focus, equity, inclusion, anti-austerity. Government is a big part of the solution. Downtown, college town sensibilities. Who are they? They're the afflicted and those who want to help them. Usually through the public sector. Public sector, arts community, university educated. Bleak, concerned is their mood. And they constitute a bigger group than the Conservatives do, but they're divided. Half are voting for the Liberals, and now half are voting for the NDP. So that's what we're heading into now.
Where does the over 55 demographic fit in?
Overwhelmingly conservative.
On the right?
Yeah. Overwhelming. Which is why Conservatives can always count on what they call a ballot box bonus, because their guys are more likely to vote than the other guys. Anybody who says we're going to mobilize the youth vote and win the election, yeah, you're like Napoleon at Waterloo. You're going to lose. I said that because we're one. Okay, so this is our most recent poll. Came out on May the 29th. And basically all the polls are showing just about the same. We have the Conservatives at 31, we have the Liberals at 31, and we have the NDP at 30. Only time I've ever seen that in the entire time I've been doing this. Only time. So I've seen a three-way tie. Regionally, because what happens in the regions is what matters. The national numbers don't matter. It's what happens in the regions. So the Liberal Party leads in one part of the country, that's Atlantic Canada, where they're, the other two parties combined are just over what the Liberals have. Here's the problem, 32 seats, that's it. You can be at 100 in Atlantic Canada, you're going to win nothing. There's not enough. There's more around the city of Toronto in the 905 than there's in all of Atlantic Canada. Ontario's going to have 115 or 116 seats in the next election.
130.
130, there you go. 130, there's 32 in Atlantic Canada. That's where the Liberals lead. This is their big problem. They're doing well in places that don't get them a lot of seats. We'll talk about that in a second. Quebec, the NDP's moved way ahead. What's happened in the most recent polling is not that Alberta has gone over to the NDP, that hasn't happened at all. What's happened though is that Quebec seems to have picked back up from that. So what they've done is replicated what Jack Layton did in the last election. That's what the pattern looks like, because Jack Layton got 31, the NDP in our polling's at 30. Basically because of Quebec. It's the only part of the, well, BC they've come up to a bit, but not as much as in Quebec. Ontario, Conservatives and Liberals are tied. That will decide the election. The number one number I'd be watching in this next election campaign, I'll give you one other number to watch, that one. The Conservatives and the Liberals have to get at least 10 points ahead in Ontario, or they can't win a majority. Conservatives, absolutely. The Liberals, even if they did get 10 points ahead, probably won't. Saskatchewan, Manitoba owned by the Conservatives, Alberta owned by the Conservatives. The NDP's become the other option in Alberta now because of the provincial election. We'll see that where that goes over the next 4 months. And basically a three-way shootout in British Columbia. The NDP's come up a bit. But the Conservatives did very well in British Columbia in the last election. It's a place they're likely to lose seats. The magic number. A comfortable number to win a majority for the Conservatives in this next election campaign is 40%. If they're in the high 30s, they've got a very good chance of winning another majority. But 40, they probably absolutely will, just because of how the vote is distributed. So everything that you look at, don't look at the majority. If most Canadians, 50% support something, it doesn't matter. The question is, does 40 support? Because that's what they need. 50 would be a bonus, but you've got to get to 40. So, government approval. This is our most recent tracking. Harper's approval level is at 47%. Take your 40, take a look. His problem is, more people like what he's doing than will vote for him. That's a campaign I have to figure out how to run. That's opportunity, right? But most importantly, we've looked at 500 elections around the world, and this is the probability that an incumbent is reelected based on a certain percentage of government approval. So if you're an incumbent, as Stephen Harper is, and you have 5% approval, 0 chance that you're going to get reelected. Probability you're going to get reelected. If it's 30%, 19%, 35%, 36%, let's get up to where he is. 45, 78% likelihood of being reelected. 50, 90%. So the likelihood he's going to be reelected is actually quite high. The question is majority minority. And also the way that their vote is structured is where all the new people are moving. It's being driven by that. Better chance of winning than just about anybody else. Sir?
Was that just looking at first past the post systems, or was it also looking at other systems as well?
Everything. Presidential, parliamentary, local, gubernatorial, everything. We looked at 500 elections. Because there's polls everywhere, so we can take a look at it. And we looked at government approval just before election, and this is what we're doing. So is the country on the right track or the wrong direction? We're on the right track. We like where we're headed. 49. Number 40. Time for another federal party to take over. 63% say somebody else should take over. But 37%? It's not far off, is it? It's not far off. And by the way, this is a really hard question to win. It's not far off. Which party leader would make the best prime minister? Harper's back ahead on that. 38. Number 40, he's got 2 more to go. The guy who's come down big time, Justin Trudeau. He's fallen off a rock. Coming up, Thomas Mulcair. Someone you can trust. All 3 party leaders are about the same. That's good enough. It means nobody else owns this. We move on to the next thing. Someone will get things done. Harper, Trudeau, and Mulcair tie. Harper on this 39 is 1 point off. Someone who asks what it takes to lead Canada is at 40. Again, Trudeau and Mulcair coming together. Someone who has a hidden agenda, he's never been able to shake this. No matter what he does, people think all of a sudden he's going to, pull off his head and there's a lizard underneath or something. I mean, there's just this sense that this guy's up to something. I'm not quite sure what it is. He's been in power for almost 10 years. I'm not quite sure what it is, but it's going to happen. Most people do think that. Someone who's best able to manage during tough economic times. This is the Tory Trump card. 45. Trudeau and Mulcair need to knock him off of that to be. Because every poll that we go out and do, the top partisan, healthcare always comes up at the top of the chart, but it's generally not seen as a partisan issue. Nobody thinks anybody has any better solutions. But the economy is where the parties are differentiating themselves. One of these other parties has to replace him on that number, or he's going to be very hard to beat. So 45. Remember the magic number? Someone who wants to be prime minister for the right reasons. Well, apparently none of them really want to for the right reasons. Yeah, it's got to hit. Someone who has a vision of Canada you can support. Nah, I really can't support any of them on it. Harper's not far off though. Someone who will provide open, honest, and responsible government. This is the question that killed Michael Ignatius. Remember he said he was going to campaign on this in the last election? This was his thing. The numbers were pretty much like this before the last election. The first thing that you learn, if anybody's ever worked on a political strategy, is you have to find something that you're leading on or an issue that people really care about and differentiate yourself. Nobody's differentiated on this. And you've only got 37 days to make it happen. And not a lot of money. Someone who has, did I already say that? Not vision? Yeah, none of them. Someone who will Canada on the world stage. Harper's ahead on that, but the Prime Minister always leads on this. I mean, even when Mulroney was in the ditch, he was ahead on this. But, you know, 39, 40. Someone who has values that are like my own. So when Justin Trudeau comes out and talks about his values and all that, well, you can see it's had a huge impact on his numbers. None. Doesn't own it. Someone who will promote democracy and its processes effectively. All three parties have. This is where the Senate issue sits. It's already factored in, nobody's winning on it. The media loves it because they just have to walk down the street to the courthouse, to the Duffy trial, and live tweet from the gallery. It's no work at all. That's why you see it everywhere. You don't have to put anybody on an airplane anyplace. It's the easiest reporting you can do. Does anybody here care? Not really. I don't think. It doesn't come up on our surveys. The approval of the government's overall handling of the economy, the number one issue that you have to lead on if you're a government, if you're an incumbent government. Remember the magic number? 40. So you can see, even though people aren't necessarily supportive of voting for the Conservatives, if you were running their campaign, what you would do. That's why you're seeing the ads you're seeing with him doing the tough decisions at his desk and all that kind of stuff. This is the point they're trying to make. And I expect they'll try to fill in the substance as we get closer to the campaign. It's a very obvious campaign to run. Now this was Justin Trudeau's trump card. He did it 2 or 3 days after the election. He brought out his tax policy. We're going to tax people who are making more, a bit more. We're going to do some things on child care. We're going to do a bunch of things. This was designed for the middle class. Right? We are going to be the party of the middle class. Well, except they're not. Again, this is like Michael Ignatius looking at something and making decisions about how he's going to run. I don't understand why the Liberals thought this was going to work. But for which party would produce, we asked this just before the budget, which party leader would produce the best budget for Canada overall? Tories at 45. Magic number's 40. For the middle class, all three parties bunched within 7 points. Nobody owns it. For the average taxpayer, all three parties bunched within 7 points. Nobody owns it. And finally, me and my family, all parties bunched within 9 points. Nobody owns it. So if this is a winning issue for you, you've got to be 15 points ahead of them. We're on the Liberals. In fact, it's arguable that the NDP is competing with them. This is what happens when you overthink things. When you not only have to win the election, you have to win it for the right reasons. It's intellectually interesting for you, which is where these guys go. They go way too intellectual. This is what happens. You lose perspective on the obvious. So, a new twist for 2015. Here's the seats. 2011 election, the Liberals won 34, the Conservatives won 166, a comfortable majority. NDP 103, the Bloc 4, and of course Elizabeth May, our drunken cheerleader for Parliament. That was a bad day for her. So what Elections Canada did was took all of the new ridings, all of the ridings in Canada, almost all of them are changing boundaries. Plus there's been another 30 seats that have been added to the House of Commons prior to the next election. 50 of them in Ontario, 6 in Alberta, and 6 in British Columbia. There's 3 that have been added in Quebec. So when you take the last election results and you apply them to the current seat counts, and you take a look at which parties gain, which parties win those 30 seats based on the last election, the Conservatives win 22 of them. Why? The new seats are in the suburbs. That's where the Conservatives do well. Now they won't probably do that because it's, unless something really tragic happens to the Liberals, I can't imagine them getting 18% again. But the Tories are starting ahead here when it comes to evaluating how the next election is going to go. And in fact, they would have won a bigger majority. There's 2 seat models that are out there. One that from the Laurier Institute of Politics and Policy, Public Opinion and Policy, Liz Pop, Andre runs, and the other one's by a company called 308. I don't have the latest Liz Pop one up here because Andre just told me about it just before we came up here. But they're both fairly similar. So this is taking all of the most recent polling and trying to calibrate how seats would be won based on the polling. And all of the recent polling is pretty much showing a 3-way tie. So if you take a look at what the seat models produce, the Conservatives win in both models, but they only win a minority, and a fairly small one. But what's really interesting is in the most recent one, which is the 308 one, I haven't got the Laurier one, but I think it's fairly coincidental to what's here. In both of them, the Liberal Party's 30. So, interesting times. Yeah. It could very well. It's a wild card. Nobody's factored it in, but you just happened to
Repeat the question.
Yeah, she was just saying, Krista was just saying that you may not have heard everything old, it's new again. Gilles Duceppe is now the leader of the Bloc Québécois again. But as you know, he got pounded in the last election. So Gilles Duceppe up against Thomas Mulcair. I think Thomas Mulcair's not feeling too bad about that. But the Liberals are probably celebrating it because they need the NDP to come down. So if the Bloc picks up a bit, they're probably taking it from the NDP. So let's talk about the Conservative strategy. 2 minutes. Yeah. 5 minutes. The Conservative strategy, the Liberal strategy, the NDP strategy, and I'll tell you what to watch for from now into the election. Conservative strategy. The Conservative Party's vote pool is too small. That's the number of people who are going to be either have them as first choice or second choice. You saw what the issue was. Their approval level is up here, but their vote is down here. The thing that they're most concerned about, maybe premature, but it may not be, is that the Liberal vote is going to collapse. The way I describe Justin Trudeau right now is like a guy standing in a 2-floor house. He's on the 2nd floor, and there's this raging fire underneath him. He doesn't realize it's happening, and that floor is about to go. It could very well. So they're really worried that what's going to happen is the Liberals are going to collapse and they're all going to go to the NDP. That's their biggest concern. So they need to find a way to increase their appeal among people who are potential, particularly Liberal switchers. Because if you take a look at the results of the last election and where the votes have gone, the NDP's gone back to where they were. The Liberals have gone from 18 up to 31. So you know that there is big chunk of votes, 13 points there, that they probably pulled out of a couple of other parties, but mostly out of the Tories. So these are a lot of people who voted Conservative last time, and people say, I'm not doing it this time. We've got to find a way to appeal to these Liberal Conservative switchers. You need to press the contradiction that exists among those who support other parties, but also approve of the government's performance, especially on the economy. I expect you're going to see this stuff pounded away over the next while. They have to answer the question, why isn't it time for change? Because the other 2 parties are going to be saying it is time for change. What's the risk associated with change? They've done it with Trudeau, and I think they made him look riskier than the Liberals are comfortable with. They haven't done it yet with Mulcair. In fact, I don't think they figured out how to go after Mulcair. What they need to do is find people about the positives, such as they are over the last decade, and define the risk represented by the opposition parties. The most immediate target will be the Liberals, the only party that's increased its support since the last election. Geographic targets, the 905, this area actually, the Lower Mainland and Quebec City, their realistic goal is a majority or a workable minority. The Liberals, their biggest strength and their biggest weakness is their leader. They need to show he is ready. When the Tories ran those ads when he was first elected, it was like they put a little infection in it that said, this guy's not ready. And then he proceeded over the last 2 years to demonstrate to enough people that he isn't, that what the Tories predicted would happen, happened. He collapsed. Not as far as Ignacio did, but he's certainly not in the lead anymore. So it's infected him. And the perception that the public has of him now is that he's not ready. So their campaign has to be, we are ready. If you can figure out how to do that in the next 4 months, be my guest. It's a really tough charge to go against. But, you know, he's got a lot of smart people around him. They know this is their challenge. Let's see what they do about it. As long as the CPC, that's the Conservative Party, is stronger in the economy, they'll be tough to beat. They need to find a way with middle-class suburban strivers to tell them that they're better for the economy than the Conservatives are, because right now they believe it's the Conservatives. I don't know if it's this inequality stuff, middle-class advocacy, all around this issue of change. This is what they're going to have to figure out a way to do. They need to find a way to break out of their low-seat enclaves. They're too strong in Atlantic Canada, the 416 and the West Island of Montreal. They need to go to places where they can win more seats. They can't win enough seats here, as you saw by the seat block. Without a stronger geographic base, it will be tough to roll up seats and win. Their geographic targets are suburban Ontario and Quebec. You're going to see Justin Trudeau there all the time, plus the Lower Mainland and British Columbia. Their realistic goal is they have to do better than third. If they don't do better than third, they don't have the whip hand in the coalition. And the potential that there's a Conservative minority government again rises, in my view. The NDP strategy. Smiling Tom, you're smiling a lot these days. They've now rebuilt to where they were. Can they hold on to this? That's their challenge. The search for the NDP has been in Quebec. It's still a struggle for them in other places, especially in Ontario where they haven't picked up. And actually did no better generally than historically they did in Ontario in the last election. All of the action was in Quebec. Outside of Quebec, their leader is a cipher. Nobody knows who this guy is. That gives you a lot of opportunity, but it also creates a big problem. If you say the wrong thing, it's going to explode. Ask Kim Campbell. That's what happened to her. Their realistic goal, coalition on NDP's terms, or prevent Trudeau from becoming the Prime Minister. If Trudeau becomes the Prime Minister, they lose. So what to watch for? Most likely outcome is right now it's Conservative minority. They need to get a majority. They need the Liberals to fall into the low 20s, and they need the NDP to repeat. It makes the vote splits work for them. Overall government satisfaction is about 45. They're ahead of the magic number of 40. That's important. They've got room to grow. In Ontario, Liberals and Conservatives need a double-digit lead, especially in the 905 in the Southwest, in order to win. And finally, the Lower Mainland of British Columbia is going to get more action than just about any other place outside the 905 in this country in the next election campaign, because that's the most competitive region in the country. There you go, folks. That's the election.